Hey everyone, I'm your host, Emily Lauren. Welcome to the Body Positive Podcast, where we ditch diets, normalize real bodies, and help you feel better in your own skin. Welcome everyone to the Body Positive Podcast show. Today's episode is featuring Gabrielle Usatinsky, who is a licensed professional counselor at Power Couples Counseling and the author of a book called The Power Couple Formula. Thank you so much for being here today to talk to us all about relationships and navigating body image issues.
Hi, Emily. I'm so happy to be able to speak with you today.
So let's start off by talking about when couples first get together. They might be coming from very different backgrounds or have had very different experiences in their upbringing. How does this impact a relationship?
Sure. Well, I think one key piece to this question has to do with the phases of relationship. We actually go through there are natural stages or phases to every romantic relationship. And because we don't really run into sort of the issues related to our backgrounds so much at the beginning of the relationship. That tends to happen later in the relationship. What happens with the natural course of developing an intimate relationship with someone is the first phase is kind of like we're in love, right? And our brains are on drugs, we say, because our brains are kind of cooking up this perfect neuro cocktail of hormones that make us feel all of those feelings that we associate with being in love: the euphoria, the obsession, the passion, the excitement, as well as some of the anxiety, like, you can't wait to see your partner, and, you can't eat or sleep because, you miss them so much. And so in that early stage, we're really kind of in a brain fog, you could say, because our bodies and brains are being flooded by all of these neurochemicals, and we really don't see clearly. We don't see the other person clearly at all. And you could say that that's really kind of nature's way of, from an evolutionary perspective, of making sure that we get together and we procreate, right? Because if we sort of saw all of the, our partner's flaws right from the beginning, well, maybe we wouldn't jump in so quickly, right? So easily. So that's all very natural, and that stage lasts about 6 months to 2 years, depending on the individual and depending on the couple. And but what happens is, at a certain point in the relationship, the couple starts to regard each other as permanent to each other, and that change could be initiated by a number of different hallmarks in the relationship. It could be that we've decided that we're going to be monogamous. We're going to be each other's one and onlys. We're only going to date each other. It could be that we decide to get married. It could be that we move in together. So it sort of depends on the couple, but at some point there's that transition into permanence. And the brain actually, when that transition to permanence occurs, there are important changes going on in the brains of both of these partners. And what happens is, now the partners become, whether they like it or not, they become what we call attachment figures for each other. And what that means is that the relationship starts to replicate or imitate, you could say, our early experiences of dependency on our parents when we were little. Okay.
So is that what you call attachment theory?
So this is when the attachment starts to form, and this is whether you like it or not. As soon as you guys are permanent, what the permanency does is it activates those early relationship blueprints, because we know that we form relationship blueprints in our early experiences with our parents when we're little, and we carry those blueprints with us into our adult intimate relationships. And if those blueprints are insecure in terms of how they function, they're going to wreak havoc for us when we become adults, until we resolve the blueprints. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So that process starts, as I say, as soon as the couple makes that step to commit to one another. And that's the point that we start to, in answer to your question, that we start to run into all of the things that we learned about relationship from our background, to answer your question, all of the sort of what we'd call implicit scripts, the way what we think about what relationships are, not even consciously think about, but they're, as I say, these are more unconscious types of patterns about, whether, are people helpful or do they use and abuse me? Are they there for me or are they always abandoning me? All these ideas we sort of have about our partner get activated at that point based on our early relationship blueprints. Okay.
So how can this affect the way partners relate to each other in their bodies?
Right. So part of that blueprint has to do with how we learned to manage our energy when we were a child. So we all have ways that we manage our energy, how we manage sort of the highs and lows, of our energy throughout the day. And what we hope so I'll say in clinical terms, we call that energy management. It has sort of a technical term. We call it nervous system arousal regulation. And all that means is, are we able to use other people in order to calm down, in order to get excited, or is that kind of something we are wired to do by ourselves? And so depending on the kind of attachment formation that we had, we learn different patterns. A person will learn a particular pattern of how to do that based on how their parents related to them. And really this goes all the way back to those early experiences in infancy around, because we know that children need a lot of touch, they need face-to-face contact, they need eye-to-eye contact, they need skin-to-skin contact, and that this is part of how the child's brain, it's a critical part of how we build social emotional intelligence. It's a critical part of how we learn to interact in a way with another person. We call that interactive regulation. And so when a child has a very nourishing experience, you can kind of imagine as an image that goes with like the mother breastfeeding the child, and you kind of have to imagine that that's a very blissful experience for the child, and all of their senses are awake, and they kind of engage in this beautiful dance of mother and child actually calming down together, mother and child getting excited together, excited play, and then moments of relaxation. And so all of that dance that occurs in that early attachment relationship is a critical blueprint for an adult's ability later in life to be able to engage in interactive, what we call co-regulation or interactive regulation with their partner. And that means, do we know how to be close to each other, how to be tender with each other, how to calm each other down, how to excite each other? So, as I say, if you have that kind of experience where you get this amazing sort of bonding experience and that produces what we'd call secure attachment, you learn how to do those things. You learn how to co-regulate with another person as an adult. But what happens if you don't get that? What happens if your early experiences, you didn't get a lot of face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact. There wasn't a lot of touch. So that is what we would call a low contact environment, early environment, and we know that that is what produces what we call avoidant attachment. And avoidant attachment is a certain attachment style that happens in families that aren't focused on relationships, where there isn't a lot of affection, there's just a lack of social emotional contact in general. And these are people who often report as adults, they're like, yeah, I didn't really come from a touchy-feely family.
Yes.
I didn't really even see my parents that much. Most of my interaction with my parents was maybe around my grades or, looking good or saying the right thing at the dining room table. But I spent a lot of time playing by myself, right? And so what happens in avoidant families is that children don't learn how to co-regulate with another person, because there isn't an adult there to teach them how to engage in an interaction and regulate their energy. And this relates directly, I'm kind of the long answer, but it's an important background to understand what happens in intimate relationships where we run into feelings of not liking our partner's body. So if you give me if you just give me 1 second here. So what happens for these children is they spend a lot of time alone, and they learn to manage their energy by themselves. And when you see a parent, usually a parent comes to that child, and it's usually only when the parent wants something for themselves from that child. So they're not on the floor playing with that child, they're not interacting or helping that child to relax or soothing that child when they get upset. Basically, the child is left alone a lot of the time, except if the parent comes and says, time to do your homework, or tuck in your shirt, or why didn't you clean up your room? So the child's whole sense of what it means to interact with another person is, this is going to be all about you. And this is going to feel like I'm being encroached upon when you come in. You're going to invade my space. And you hear that a lot, actually, with adults, fast forward to adulthood, who have avoidant attachment. They will often articulate this very strong need for personal space. They're very sensitive to their spatial boundaries being violated. And that's where that comes from. Is my early experience was I was basically alone, and when somebody came, it was a grown-up who needed something from me. So I was being used to support them rather than how it should have been, right?
Wow.
So if we fast forward here to, and feel free to stop me at any point.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is fascinating. I want to know, can that be changed in your relationship, or is that something that just you have to adapt to as two people?
This can absolutely be changed, and people can continue to develop and actually need to learn how to work through this particular blueprint, because it is so incredibly damaging to relationships. Now, I want to just say a couple things about how this affects adult intimate relationships before we go into talking about what to do about it. So what happens is when fast forward to adulthood, and this person with avoidant attachment is in a relationship, a new relationship, and in the beginning of the relationship, as I said earlier, these issues around you not liking your partner's body, being disgusted by your partner, those types of things, those are not going to come up at the beginning of the relationship, because, as I said, everyone's brains are on drugs. We are like superhuman versions of ourselves. We can do things that we cannot do later in the relationship. And so we're going to be able to sort of circumvent all of those problematic ideas, impressions, feelings, sensations just are not going to show up until we become permanent to each other. Okay?
Makes total sense.
Right. So now we're permanent. And, I'm this avoidant person. And it's like, whereas I was really hot for you in the beginning, and the fact that you have sort of, like Renee Zellweger said in what was the movie, the famous series?
Bridget Jones?
Bridget Jones, right?
Yes.
All of my wobbly parts, you didn't care about my wobbly parts in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So you're the avoidant person. It's like, well, I didn't even notice you had cellulite. I didn't even notice that your nose is crooked, or that you have a few extra pounds. Like, I was just so hot for you. You were the perfect vision, right? And suddenly now we're permanent, and I don't like the way you look anymore. And not only do I not like the way you look, I don't like the way you smell. I don't like the way your breath smells. I don't like the way your body odor smells. I don't like it when I go down on you. I don't like the way you taste. Okay, so these are all of the things that very often will start to happen for people with avoidant attachment. And that phenomenon has a clinical name. We call that aversion of the near senses.
Okay.
So you're averse to things like taste, like touch, like smell, like anything that has that sensorial aspect to it is a turn off. And it will very often lead to a disgust response in the partner. And so we want to understand again where that comes from, why that's there. Because what usually happens is people who have this kind of disgust response to their partner and who start to get really concerned about their partner's weight. And so I'm kind of mixing a few things because some of this is sort of a version of the near senses. Some of it is you don't match the image of the ideal partner that I have in my mind, which is the perfectly thin bikini model. It didn't bother me in the beginning that you're not that way, but now it really bothers me. And I'm fantasizing about the perfect partner, and you don't meet that image of perfection, right? So all of this stuff, both that aversion to the near senses and then that fantasizing about this perfect partner and the partner not measuring up. Again, all that stuff relates back to that early childhood lack of connection, lack of face-to-face, eye-to-eye, skin-to-skin, lack of ability to regulate one's energy with another person, and the sense of being, my space is always being invaded. Okay? Yeah.
So are there varying levels when it comes to this? Like if someone had, a more negative experience or this affected them more than someone else, like maybe it's just maybe it's not so much the taste and smell, but maybe it's more touch and needing space. Can it vary?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes because everybody is so unique, everybody is just absolutely unique, and everybody's story is different. And so very often these specific sensitivities or aversions is a better word that people have to specific types of contact relate to specific experiences or lack thereof that they had with their primary caregivers when they were little. So for instance, very often what you see in avoidant families is children they're left alone a lot, they play alone a lot, but they might have had a parent who, when they were holding the child as an infant, the parent was invasive with eye contact. So, the child would be looking into the parent's eyes, and then the child needs a break from eye contact because eye contact is very stimulating, and babies need to take a break from eye contact, which they naturally will look away, which is important that they do that. And instead of allowing the baby to look away, the parent will pursue the child's eyes and try to get the child to stay with them in their eyes. And maybe they're getting a hostile look from the parent. So all of these impressions around eye contact and the hostility and the expectation, the sense of being used, all of that, the invasiveness will then get projected onto their partner when that person becomes an adult. And suddenly they cannot stay in their partner's eyes. And these are people who are going to prefer, usually, sexual positions that do not involve direct eye contact. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Yeah, because that direct eye contact, that direct contact that occurs during sex, especially when we are face-to-face, belly-to-belly, is it's highly, highly stressful for a person who has avoidant attachment.
And what if one parent is sort of like that and has maybe affected them a little bit more negatively, but then there's another parent who is a little bit more encouraging and more along the lines of that proper caregiving role. Can that sort of give you mixed messages, I guess?
Very good question. Yeah. So fortunately, what we know from the research is that children will always go for the maximum amount of connection, the maximum amount of bonding that is available. So if there's one parent who is insecure and avoidantly attached themselves, which often parents of avoidant children are avoidantly attached themselves, but the other parent is, let's say, securely attached and provides a lot of affection for that child, that secure interaction is also going to impact the formation of that child's attachment style. So that child will probably have, maybe a part of them that is more on the avoidance side, but they might have the ability to flip into a more kind of secure pattern as well. So you might very well see elements of both there. That's possible. One of the determining factors, though, is how much parenting each of those parents did. So obviously,
Yes.
the parent who spent the most time with the child, and in general, in infancy, and you know, we know the attachment window is actually 0 to 12 years old. It's the window of childhood. And so all of those early impressions during 0 to 12 are very important to the formation of that attachment style of the child. However, those early infancy years are, you know, up till 3 years old are particularly formative, and so very often the child is spending more time with the mother during those years, and so that often has a strong impact on the attachment style. But hey, the father's impact is extraordinarily important at the same time. So yes, that's good news.
Absolutely. So partners can be critical of one another, regardless, and obviously impacted by the way that they're brought up. Would you say that you can have that secure attachment, but also still feel like there's some things that annoy you about your partner and the way they look later on in life, or is it strictly related to this avoidant attachment?
Okay, well, let's be clear that being annoyed by our partner is very normal and natural, and hopefully we are all annoyed by our partners, because people are annoying, and and everybody, it takes work to be in relationship, because the fact of the matter is that as human beings, all of us, including avoidants, have lots and lots of needs. That's our baseline. We have lots and lots of needs of the people closest to us, or at least we should, because we are bonding mammals. This is not just a human thing. This is our mammalian heritage, and the fact that just like all mammals, we need to develop warm, secure bonds with other mammals in order to ensure survival. So this is not like a choice, right? It's not like I prefer to be in relationships with other people. Of course, many people really would prefer to be on their own, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the issue is everybody needs somebody. Everybody needs somebody.
Yes.
Right. So to answer your question, we have needs in relationships for distress relief, for soothing, for comfort, for lots of affection, for words of praise, for words of gratitude, for protecting each other, and maintaining the safety of our relationship at any costs.
Makes sense.
Right. And so for those people who would deny that, when people deny that, that's because they came from families where that wasn't the rule of the day, where they didn't see people protecting each other, parents protecting each other. They didn't see parents putting each other first. They didn't experience parents who relieved them when they were upset. Maybe they were shamed for being in distress. And they learned very early to shut all of that stuff down, because kids are very, very good at picking up on what are the expectations here in my family that I need to fulfill in order to get the maximum amount of respect, of bonding, of connection is really the thing, even in an avoidant family. So kids learn that stuff very early. And part of that amounts to the denial of attachment needs later in life. You see. Yeah.
So if one partner becomes critical towards the other in terms of how their body should look, for example, telling them they need to lose weight or even get work done, how does a couple navigate this situation?
Right. Well, the first thing here is I wanted to just say one thing. So just to give you the short answer to that is it's very important that people understand what their particular issues are that they bring to the relationship and how they personally tend to get into trouble in the relationship, the kinds of problems that they tend to bring, because we all bring our problems to the relationship, right?
Yes.
And we all have ways that we behave that are can be destructive, or can be at least not useful. And we need to know, in order to have a successful long-term relationship, you need to have self-awareness of, here's what I tend to do that gets me into trouble, and here's where this came from. Here's why I do that. Because most of the time we have zero understanding of why we do what we do, right? And so people have to be responsible for that and then work together to resolve those maladaptive behaviors. But the problem is with this type of thing, with avoidant behaviors, the issue that often arises is that avoidants are people who tend to blame the other person. So when they don't like the way, I'm an avoidant, I don't like the way my partner looks, that must be my partner's problem.
Okay.
And whereas if we look at anxious attachment, which is the other end of the attachment spectrum, those are people who tend to blame themselves. So, well, if I'm an anxious person, my partner doesn't like the way I look, that must be something wrong with me, right? And so, because they're internalizers, avoidants are externalizers. So you see how you can get into a perfect storm relationship where you have an avoidant person paired with an anxious person, and this is a very common pairing. It's the number one pairing that couples therapists the world over see in their offices is avoidant anxious pairing, as a resource that was written about quite eloquently in Amir Levine's book Attached, which is talks about what they call the anxious avoidant trap. And so if people want to read more, they can look at that book. But anyway, so the idea here is that the avoidant partner is saying, well, you need to change. You're the problem here. You need to live up to my expectations, right? And so that in and of itself is a problem. If somebody is saying you don't have the right, feet, you don't have the right nose, you have too much cellulite, you're fat, you're gross, you gave birth and now you're gross after you gave birth, right? I mean, these are all things that you hear from couples where someone is having a really a disgust reaction to their partner's body. That is that person's problem. It's something that they're bringing to the relationship, and in no way should that be the problem of the person that they picked, because these people picked each other. And the thing is, if the person who has avoidant attachment is just going to say, well, you're not the right one for me, I've got to find somebody else, guess what? The same thing is going to happen as soon as they enter into that committed stage of the relationship. All those feelings of disgust and aversion are going to come right back up, right?
Wow.
Because this is their issue, right? And so I think, but to even take this a little bit from an even broader perspective, a question that a couple needs to be able to answer is, why should we be together at all? Because if we're just together to fulfill each other's fantasies of the perfect body, and like fulfilling each other's perfect sexual fantasies of having no cellulite and the perfect waist and whatever, then we're in trouble. We're in trouble because
there's more to a relationship, right?
Well, not only that, but let's say you just decide that that's what you want your relationship to be. You're in trouble because you're going to get old, and your skin is going to sag, and you're going to get hair growing out of all kinds of places that you don't want. And if you're a man, your butt's going to get flat, and if you're a woman, you're going to get cellulite, and all of these, you're going to spread and melt, and all these things are going to start happening. And if you base your relationship on us living up to this perfect physical ideal, well, you guys are going to be up the creek without a paddle pretty soon.
Wow. That's
Right?
wild. I think a lot of women too worry that if they let themselves go, their partner won't be interested anymore. And I guess that relates more to what you're saying about that anxious style.
Yes.
And it would depend on what your partner is and how that can what outcome that can have, right? So if that person is avoidant, they might make those insecurities about yourself come to rise more, as opposed to making you feel better and more secure in yourself. Is that correct?
Absolutely, right? Because that's what I was saying, was that because people who are anxiously attached tend to be very hard on themselves, tend to be the ones who, blame themselves when something goes wrong in the relationship. Then if you have somebody who's ready to blame you, then you're deciding to go along with that, and that's on you, really, because the anxious person. So the steps there, really, I think, for anybody getting into a relationship to avoid creating this kind of relationship is to be really clear right from the very beginning with yourself about what kind of relationship you want to have. Because if you know and you decide for yourself, look, I want to have a relationship for myself that's based on things like decency, that's based on equality, on empathy, on sensitivity, on collaboration, on reciprocity. These are the kinds of principles that are going to make a relationship stand the test of time. And so,
and can you reevaluate those things throughout, as long as you're working as a team, sort of thing?
What do you mean by reevaluate?
This is what, in the beginning, how you were saying it was more about attraction and passion and things like that. But as you get to know each other more, can you rely on each other for different things? Can that evolve? Or is that something you have to decide, as soon as that first stage of your relationship is?
Right. So think about that for a second, right? So we're looking for something in building long-term committed intimate relationships that is unchangeable, that does not change. Now the expression of it might change, but let's take the principle of distress relief, quick distress relief, okay, which we know from the research about marital outcome studies that couples need to be very good at relieving each other's distress quickly in order for the relationship to last, okay? So let's say that you decide, because you're familiar with the research, and you decide quick distress relief sounds like a really baseline principle that I want in my relationship. Now, is that ever going to change for you? Well, hopefully not, because the alternative to that is, it's okay if we just leave each other in distress, no problem. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying what are the principles that we can count on that will not change over time, that we will, just when people get married and they take vows, we vow to do these things for each other. And that means that if our bodies change, we might have a loss of money. A lot of people lost their jobs in the pandemic. We might run into chronic illness. We might run into all of the kinds of things that happen, the horrible things that happen to human beings. And yet our agreements to each other don't change.
Yes.
Now, maybe that, as I said, the expression changes because we're people moving through time, and maybe at one point, we're in the workforce and we need support in this particular way to, from our partner, and we need a cheerleader, and we need and maybe at other times we're a stay-at-home mom and we need support in that way. But the underlying principle is the same, you see.
So if someone wants someone to be compassionate and accepting of them, of what they look like, but they're starting to see signs that is not something that their partner is doing, what happens to the relationship? Is it salvageable? Is it something that can be worked through?
Yes. So if you are being blamed for the way you look or being criticized by your partner, it's important that you address that head on with them in a loving way. And you can do this by saying, listen, honey, I'm all about making you happy, but my body is my body. And if you're having difficulty with my body, this is something we're going to have to work on.
Your partner needs to be accountable. So it's a them issue that they need to tackle.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Because you understand there's a difference between a partner saying, God, I just love it when you wear that red dress.
Yes.
I like the red dress, maybe not the blue dress as much, but that red dress really does it for me. That's a totally different level.
That's a preference.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But we're talking about really, really deep kind of unconscious issues that need to be unearthed here. And very often that needs to happen with the assistance of a therapist to really get to where these things come from and start to help that person to take responsibility for that. And at the same time, the partner of that avoidant partner saying, listen, I'm not going to stand for this. Mm-hmm. This is how I look. This is me. This is my body's going to change over time. And I'm not willing to be in a situation where you are going to criticize me every time I put on 5 pounds. Nuh-uh.
I love that. So to sum it all up, what is the key to a happy and healthy relationship?
That's a really big question.
I know it's a really broad one, but
yeah. Do you want me to go broad on that, or do you want me to keep it?
Let's talk broad in a broad sense.
Okay, sure. So let's see. The key to a healthy and happy relationship, I think, as I said, is that people spend a lot of time thinking about how they want their partner to look. When they imagine the ideal partner, a lot of people create their list, and they want their partner to make this much money, and they want them to have this type of six-pack, and they want them to be a churchgoer, and they want them to, dress well and whatever. But again, understanding what the behaviors are that, let me say that again. The principles are going to sustain the relationship over time. And putting that out there right from the very beginning, because that way you can make sure that you are attracting people who are looking for the same kind of relationship that you are. Anybody who's not looking for that is going to fall by the wayside.
I love that.
Yes. And so also understand, in terms of the what makes a healthy, happy relationship, is that we have agreements with each other about how we treat each other. And we hold to those agreements. Because at the end of the day, a relationship is agreements. A relationship equals agreements. So do we protect each other? Do we put each other first? Do we treat each other with sensitivity and kindness? Are we affectionate with each other every day? Do we understand each other deeply, even more deeply than perhaps each person understands themselves? Those are reasons to be in a relationship. But what happens is people get into relationships without ever having thought about what this should be about, and then they get upset when their partner doesn't act the way they want them to, when actually they never talked about it to begin with.
And that's why therapy is so important, obviously.
Yes, although I think people can, with a level of education, achieve a lot of these things on their own, because if they understand, hey, I should think about the kind of relationship I want and talk about that freely and openly with potential partners, and that will scare away the ones who aren't good candidates, and good riddance, right? Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what we can expect to learn from your book.
Oh, okay. Well, the Power Couple formula is actually a deep dive into looking at the deep kind of brain circuits that drive our behavior in relationship. And it's really bridging a lot of research into animal behavior with human behavior. So it has an evolutionary kind of bent to it. But the idea is to really understand that, what's driving us in our relationships is not the formal cognitive thinking part of our brain. Our behavior in relationships is being driven by the deeper, lower brain, the animal brain. And so because relationships are really all about safety and security, our brain is primarily wired for threat we're primarily wired to not get killed, not to love people, but to not get killed, right? And so we have to take threat absolutely seriously in our intimate relationships and learn how to get rid of anything that is threatening to either person in our relationship. So the book is really looking at all of these kind of deep neural circuits around all of the core emotions of the human being, everything from caring for each other, what we call panic grief, which is also known as the attachment system. It's looking at lust, rage, fear, and this what we call the seeking system, how we go out into the world and kind of go after what we want, and also the play system. So all of these types of things, meaning that we all have an actual neural circuit that has to do with the need to play, the need for play. And something we didn't know, but couples need to be able to play every day with each other. They need to know how to deal with each other's lust, each other's rage, each other's fear, each other's grief. All of these things are core emotions that arise from very, very deep within our animal brains and have everything to do with the kinds of trouble that couples get into in their relationships. And so that's really what this book is about, is helping people navigate that deep terrain.
That sounds so fascinating. I can't wait to read the whole thing. Please let us know where we can get your book and where we can find you online.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you right now. Sure, you can go. So I haven't. Can I tell you kind of how people can find me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I have a YouTube channel which is called Power Couples Education, and I publish a 10-minute educational video about building healthy relationships every week. So you can go there and subscribe, and you will get to watch the very informative videos. And then you can also go to powercoupleseducation.com and sign up to get valuable information about relationships delivered straight to your inbox. And also thepowercoupleformula.com, thepowercoupleformula.com, which is the website for the book. And you can sign up to get notified for when the book comes out. The other thing, and I'll also say that I'm not a relationship coach, so I don't work with people online as a coach, but my clinical practice as a therapist is an online practice. So if you're within the state of Colorado, you can work with me as in couples therapy. And that that website is powercouplescounseling.com. Okay?
Sounds amazing. So lastly, if you could offer one tip to our listeners, what would that be? I always like to stump everyone at the end with that one.
Yeah. You know, I have a certain feeling, tell me if you feel this is accurate, about your listeners in particular, that a lot of people are struggling with self-esteem, with loving their bodies, and by extension with self-love, with loving themselves and feeling, are they really valuable? Are they really worth having a great relationship? Would you say that that's true?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And to those questions, I would say yes, you absolutely deserve to have a wonderful, loving, supportive, warm, affectionate relationship where you feel like you are the most precious thing on earth to your partner, and where you are valued and celebrated for who you are and not the way you look.
Perfect. And I think everyone needs to know that their value doesn't come from their appearance. And I think that is so Great. And I just really appreciate your time. I've never thought about some of these things that you discussed, and I think it will be really beneficial for people to understand maybe a little bit more about where their partners come from and how to look out for the right person when they are beginning that process. So thank you so much for being here today. It was really such a pleasure.
It was a pleasure to speak with you too, Emily. Thank you.
Once again, thanks for listening to today's episode. Make sure you follow us at Real Happy Daughter, and please share this with someone who needs a little more real in their life.